All right, so I'm gonna get started, and this is our monthly webinar on today's topic is going to be alimony, and it's on myths and misconceptions about alimony. And I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about some of my cases and some of the hot issues that come up, and then not just related to my specific cases, but just in general, some of the comments that I hear, the questions that I get in general from people that know what I do. And I just had to start with, well, before I get into my first myth or misconception, what is alimony? Alimony is an interchangeable term with spousal support. So this has nothing to do with children. It's not the same as child support. It's not child support. This is when you have a marriage and then a divorce, and one party has the need for financial support for themselves, whether that's household expenses, automobile, health insurance, whatever it is. Basically, they have a certain income, they have certain expenses, and then whatever is that what is that deficit every month, right? So for example, let's just say, it's really easy to say, it costs $5,000 a month to live in South Florida. Easy. That's low, just for easy numbers. And somebody makes on their own $2,500. So then if they have expenses that exceed that remaining $2,500, whatever that deficit is, that's going to be their quote need. Then we look to the other party, the other spouse, to see, do they have the ability to pay that deficit? So that's what alimony is in a nutshell. It's spousal support, not related to children's issues or children's expenses. And currently in Florida, there is no formula for alimony. So it's very discretionary. And what I usually tell my clients is that you could ask 5 different judges, what should the alimony amount be? And you may probably get 5 different answers. It's really discretionary. So, and the legislature, they're working on trying to change that. We actually just had Governor DeSantis veto the latest alimony bill for various reasons I won't get into today, but there's still no new law on how to calculate alimony. So it's really discretionary. So my first myth that I just had to start with, thank you, is that only men pay alimony. Because I hear this a lot. I get like, and I'm not hating on men. I'm not. But I hear this a lot from men, like, oh, men always get, the shitty side of things. Sorry for my language. They always get screwed. It's always the guy paying. And I know that it seems to be that way for whatever reason. You've got, it's the male figure that is more the breadwinner, so to speak. But, but it's not like you're the guy, you're paying alimony. It doesn't work that way. I've had real life cases where the woman is exposed to paying alimony to the husband. So it's just not true that it's always the guy, that it's always the man, always the husband, the father, whatever. It can be women because it's based on need and ability. So I'm sure my ex-husband would just really appreciate me saying this, but I mean, I always made more money than he, well, not always, but I make more money than he does. So if he wanted to come after me for alimony at a certain point in time, it could be that I'd be paying him because I make more money. And if he can show that financial need for alimony based on his own income and expenses, then he'd look to me to see what my ability is. And if I'm making more, then it's going to work out that way, that I'm going to be the one paying if I have to pay, if someone has to pay. So it's not just like we're picking on men. And on that note, I will say, some of these men that come in that for example, like firefighters, right? Firefighters get really bent out of shape about, because they make a great living. That's actually what my ex-husband does. They make a great living. And they a lot of times just can't understand why they would have to pay. And I'm not picking on firefighters either, but again, like they can't understand, why do I have to pay? And I say, well, look who you married. If you had married a doctor, a professional, a woman that had a good living, then it probably wouldn't be the case. But you chose to marry a certain person with a certain maybe background, education, whatever her work history is, and that's kind of the way it goes. Now, we can get into the subject of what happens if the couple decides that the wife is going to stay home and care for the kids. That's another subject. Maybe we should do another webinar on that, because I feel like I'm going to get in the weeds on that issue. But the point being that it's based on income levels and need and ability. So that's the first myth, that it's just men paying. Okay, number 2. Any questions on that, by the way? Or anybody want to scream and shout at me for the things I just said? All right. Number 2, this is a myth, right? Or it's a misconception that permanent alimony is actually permanent. So, oh, someone just asked me a question. All right, I'm going to come back to this question. So number 2, permanent alimony is permanent. That's a misconception, and I want to explain, obviously. So we have different types of alimony in the state of Florida. One of them currently is still permanent alimony. And what I always explain to people when we're talking about permanent alimony is that they call it permanent, but it's not really permanent. At some point, it's going to end. So it's really more like indefinite until something else happens. And usually those triggering events are one of the following, whatever comes first, right? It's someone dies, either the paying spouse or the payee. Someone dies, or someone gets remarried. Not someone, I should clarify. The payee gets remarried. So, for example, Henry, just because you're on my screen, is paying permanent alimony to Jessica. And 15 years go by of him paying, and then all of a sudden Jessica gets remarried. Her permanent alimony stops. So it's not really permanent. It's indefinite until one of those triggering events takes place. Obviously, in that scenario, if Henry or Jessica died, then again, the alimony would stop. One other way to have permanent alimony either completely terminated or at least modified would be if, in that scenario, again, Jessica was in a financially supportive relationship. And there is a whole statute on defining what is a supportive, financially supportive relationship. I'm not going to get into that for this webinar. That could be like another subcategory that we talk about. But if she was shacking up with somebody, they held themselves out to be husband and wife or in some serious relationship, and we can prove that he was really paying for most of her expenses, or they were sharing bills, they had properties together, that could be considered possibly, if you look at the factors in the statute, maybe that is a financially supportive relationship. And that's another one of those triggering events that the permanent alimony could either be modified or it would completely go away depending on the circumstances. So that's number 2. Permanent alimony is not necessarily permanent. Okay, so I'm just going to jump into some of these questions before I get into number 3. So someone asks me, what if my ex wants me to pay alimony and I don't think they need my financial support? That's why I'm in business, unfortunately, because alimony is such a discretionary thing that it's a heavily litigious it's a heavily litigious or litigated topic. Sorry to pick on Henry and Jessica, but I'm just going to stick with it. So if Henry says, I need alimony, And Jessica's like, no, you don't. I don't think he needs it. That's when you really probably need to get your lawyers involved, and we would do the analysis, because he might feel that he needs it. Everyone feels like they need more money. Who doesn't, right? That's what I always say too. It's easy to show a need, but when you really do the legal and factual analysis that the lawyers or the forensic accountants or the judges do, then you might find that Henry really doesn't need alimony. And so it's an analysis that we have to dive into. And that's where exchanging the financial documentations come into play. So it's not just, just I'm going to allege it and I'm going to get it because I'm saying it or asking for it. There's a whole analysis and proof. You have to prove that you actually need it, Henry. So when we're in the process of discovery and exchanging the financial disclosures, we're going to get all the information that we need to see really what's your income, what's your ability to make an income, what are all your sources of income, and then what are your expenses looking like, and do you really have any? All right, I'm going to move on to the next one, and then I'll jump into some of those other questions that I have on the screen.